Okay, glad to be here with you guys. Susan asked that I go through some stuff on the just fallacy of this whole green energy policy. So I kind of got, yeah, my assumption is that most people on this call have some sense that this is no good. Um, Otherwise, you'd probably not be on this call. So, some of this might be preaching to the choir a little bit, but I was thinking that if anything, hopefully I'm helping to provide some ammunition, some, bullet points, some organizing material, some conceptions that will help us defeat this insane policy that's trying to be implemented now in Michigan. So, and we can get into more in the Q&A. I'll probably move a little bit fast through a bunch of stuff, and just to kind of keep it moving quick, and we can review and discuss further as needed, and make stuff available to people after if they want. But I thought it'd be good just to kind of take it in a few steps. The first step is just, it's been well demonstrated already that green energy, and we predominantly talking about wind and solar, those are the big probably the biggest initiatives on the whole green energy front, shutting down so-called fossil fuel carbon producing sources of energy in replace of the wind and solar. This has been pushed for a while now, decades, and it's been clearly shown that anywhere this is implemented in mass, it's far more expensive. And I'm sure people know energy is central to everything in the entire economy. So driving up energy costs dramatically is catastrophic, has ripple effects throughout the entire economy. So, layer one, it's the most expensive source of energy out there, especially when you try and transition a large percentage of energy generation, electricity generation, over to wind and solar. So this is just a chart I like that some people pulled together a few years ago, where you just take two factors: what percentage of a nation's electricity is generated by wind and solar, or amount per capita in this case, that's across the bottom axis, and what's the cost of electricity. And this is throughout Europe. And you can see systematically, consistently across the board, the higher utilization of wind and solar, the more expensive energy gets, right? We see this in the United States. You take California. California has been pushing these policies dramatically. And as we see here, there's the comparison between the electricity prices year over year for the United States on average across the board versus California, a nation that's pushing this wind, solar insanity. And you can see energy prices in California have rose at 7 times the rate compared to the rest of the country under this policy. So, it's already failing. It's already been demonstrated to be a failure economically in those terms. Why? Why is that the case? Well, one thing so taking it one level deeper, right? Just that those are just documented facts. Some people might debate, well, the technologies just needs to be developed better. If we had better windmills, we had better solar panels, it would become economically viable. It's incredibly important. We want to just dispel that myth completely, because the reason it's more expensive is not because of the particular technologies used, the type of windmills, the type of solar panels. It's due to first principles. It's due to the inherent low energy density of these power sources, right? You're talking about wind that we walk outside and we experience all day. You're talking about sunlight you experience directly all day, right? You're not like, try and go stand next to the furnace in a coal burning power plant, right? You're not going to be able to do that, because it's a very high level of energy intensity, energy density going on there. You go outside, you have no problem being out in the wind, in the sun, right? Because it's a low energy density, right? That the concentration of the energy in the wind moving through the atmosphere, in the sunlight reaching the Earth's surface, is very low compared to any other modern source of energy. So nothing's going to change that, right? You're not going to change the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth, right? We're not going to move the Earth closer to the sun, right? You're not going to change the amount of wind occurring throughout the planet, right? I know some people get into weather modification, craziness, and all kinds of stuff, but we're not going to use that to dramatically increase the wind to power. Like these are natural situations that we're not changing. So the reality is, because their low energy density requires a massive, a larger utilization of land and materials to capture the lower energy density sources of power, of energy, right? And so these are just some quotes, some figures from Senate testimony from a couple of years ago, where they were discussing the issue of green energy, wind and solar. And it's been shown that industrial solar and wind projects require 300 to 400 times more land than nuclear power plants, for example. That's incredible. 300 to 400 times more land area over nuclear. So if you were to extrapolate that, if you wanted to generate all of the electricity in the United States using wind and solar, when you count for all the factors that need to be involved in that, you're talking about utilizing 25 to 50% of the entire territory of the United States to provide us the current electricity we're generating now. Just absurd, completely absurd. And again, this is from Senate testimony. If you were to do that with nuclear, rather than 25 to 50% of the entire territory of the United States, you're talking about 0.5%, right? So absurd amounts of territory are required. Again, low energy density, you have to cover a lot of area to get effectively the same amount of energy. The other side of that is that the variability. These are not consistent sources of power. The wind goes up and down. Sunlight, the amount of sunlight coming in, that varies, obviously day to day, cloud cover, all that. So, the factors get driven down even further there. So the resulting physical economic impact of this is that we have the material cost, right, to cover that much territory with windmills, with solar panels, is just astronomical. It's astounding, right? And these are figures from a government study from a couple of years ago, comparing if you take just the same unit amount of electricity produced, right? So just whatever 1 megawatt hour, whatever, just pick an amount of electricity generated, right? To generate that electricity with these various power sources, you got to have materials to construct the power plants, the windmills, the solar panels, right? So you can run an analysis over the life cycle of the energy generation system, how much material is required per amount of electricity generated, right? If you really want to compare these systems apples to apples in some kind of fair way, this is a very good way to do it, right? And we can see here, comparing coal power plant, a natural gas power plant, a nuclear power plant, with all the main, material construction capital inputs required. Glass, concrete, cement, steel, copper, aluminum. Wind and solar are just, an order of magnitude plus greater material inputs required just to produce the same amount of electricity. And again, it's not something that'll change. You're not going to develop a new solar panel technology that's going to change this. This is due to first principles because of the low energy density low energy flux density of sunlight reaching the Earth. So something I did a couple of years ago looking at this was just take Biden's program that he's pushing, right? And we have a similar initiative now in Michigan where they're talking about CO2-free electricity. So we're replacing all of our electricity generation by 2035. I think what Michigan's 2040, they're talking about that, right? And then overall reduction in overall massive reduction in CO2 emissions around the same time period. If you were to implement that, you would triple the material cost, the capital cost, the physical cost of providing of our electricity just to provide the same electricity we're getting today, right? So this is taking Biden's initiative and just running the figures on what we know. The blue dotted line there is just total electricity generation. So if we just assume, we want to keep the total electricity generation consistent out through 2035, you'd have to triple the physical cost, capital goods, material inputs required to generate our electricity, right? So this is why it's dramatically more expensive, why you see costs rising, and why no technology change, et cetera, is going to be able to impact that or change that. So this is disastrous for the economy. It's already been shown to be disastrous for the economy in cases where it's been implemented. And, obviously, as we all know on this call, I'm sure we have to defeat these policies. And I wanted to take it just one step deeper, because what we're talking about are very interesting metrics here. Energy density, specifically a term that Lyndon LaRouche developed and was very emphatic about is the idea of energy flux density, which he defined as the energy throughput, basically the energy throughput to a system, right? What's the rate of energy consumption, relative to the size of a system being measured? And he would consistently come back to that metric as key for understanding economic progress, but also progress more generally. And this is something he was going at least back to the 1970s in developing these ideas. But other people have noticed it too. And, I've been looking at some work from the last decade by different researchers and came across other people realizing that this very metric, this idea of energy flux density, is basically a universal metric of progress and development, not just for human economies, not just for human society, but throughout the natural world. And there's kind of a lot in this graph here, but this is from a long study where they show that everything from galaxies, entire galactic systems, to stars, to planets, to the evolution of life on Earth, the entire history of the evolution of life, up to human society and the progress of human society, all of that is measured. Progress, development, forward motion is always associated with increasing the energy flux density, right? So this green policy, and Susan alluded to this when she said this is an evil policy, is going backwards relative to human development, and is going against the natural laws of progress in the universe, right? The universe is developing, galaxies are developing, stars are developing, things are getting more evolved, more complex. I'm sure we're all probably more familiar with that in terms of the evolution of life, right? Life has gotten more advanced, more complex over time, right? The emergence of mankind was a new level of development beyond that. And always throughout that process, increasing energy flux density is the metric for growth, for development, for moving forward. So this green policy of tying economies to this inherently low energy density source of power is, against the natural order. And, obviously is going to lead to the complete destruction of the economy. You can't just wind the economy backwards and expect expect that to work. So a little more on in the context of human societies. I really like this. I want to end with this analysis, this assessment of the U.S. economy over time, to see what progress has looked like, where we stagnated and failed, and where we need to return to save this country, to begin producing again here, begin manufacturing here again, and create an economy that's actually going to be better for future generations, right? Get back to the idea of creating a better future for our kids, for our grandkids, for future generations, right? Returning, which is I think what we're all trying to do, obviously, as participants in this call, as people involved in this political fight, right? So this is I'm going to take you through a few steps in the history of energy consumption per capita, per person, for the US economy as a whole over time. And so this goes back to the founding of the country to 1776. And we can see here the first chunk up through 1850, the primary main source of energy consumption for the economy back in those early days was biomass, wood burning. And if we run that out, we can see that eventually declined, became very minimal, and we had the rise of a new source of energy, coal. And coal itself is a good jump higher in terms of the energy contained in the coal per unit weight. The energy density of coal over wood is an advancement, and that allowed an increase in energy use and a more a higher rate of energy consumption throughout the economy as a whole. Obviously powering things like the Industrial Revolution, steam engines, internal combustion eventually. So this was the next wave of increasing energy sources was coal. That began to decline. And the next step beyond that was the development of oil and natural gas, themselves both being another step higher in energy density of the fuel source. The amount of energy you have per unit weight of oil or natural gas is double or more than coal, around 3 times that of wood, right? So per amount of weight of fuel source you get that much more energy, which is able to power a more energy dense economy as a whole. So I hope you're beginning to see here progress throughout history, in this case looking at a case study of the United States, was associated with these stepwise increases to higher energy density, higher energy flux density sources of power. That began to decline. And what we see here is what nuclear power should have done. So the last figures here on top, the red, if you don't know, nuclear power is orders of magnitude, 100,000 times or 1,000,000 times more energy dense than any chemical fuel. So it's just an amazing leap beyond even all fossil fuels. So the amount of energy you get per weight of nuclear power, fission or fusion, but obviously fission power is what we have developed so far, is just incredibly higher. And if you take the forecasts for the growth the economy was going to go through, the energy consumption expected by at the time of the John F. Kennedy administration, this is what that would have looked like. So it would have been the continuation of this natural stepwise progress upward, increasing total energy flux density of the economy as we move from one power source to the next, right? This would have been the natural progress. Unfortunately, that did not happen, right? And I'm sure most of you in this call have a sense why. We went with a post-industrial globalist system, really over 2 generations almost now. We've increasingly shut down industry, shut down production, become reliant on, these crazy global supply lines and cheap manufacturing, in poorer parts of the world and so on. And you had the takeover, this whole green, anti-growth, anti-development perspective. And this is what the economy has done under that. So this current state, compared to what we should have been, is a shadow and one indication, one way you can measure, assess, you can look at the current state of collapse and failure of the current U.S. economy. If we wanted to look at this section a little more closely, the major factor, the biggest factor in this collapse in expected energy consumption is purely due to the collapse of industry and industrial production, where that used to account for nearly half of our total energy consumption. Now it's down to about a third or less. So that's a significant drop off there, to the point where the gap of the lost energy generated, the lost energy consumption needed to have a modern industrial economy to produce here again is actually greater than the current total energy use for residential and commercial sectors individually as a whole. Right. So we're lacking right now to fulfill what Trump is promoting, what we're promoting, to produce in America again, to make America self-reliant, in major areas of production, so we're not reliant on this crazy globalist economy. To achieve that, to reindustrialize, to produce here again en masse, is going to require a major increase in energy production for industry, for production, which basically is going to require the total energy consumption for either residential or commercial, that entire amount added on top of what we currently are producing as a whole. And here's a perspective of where we could go, fully utilizing nuclear power, fully utilizing, beginning a crash program for fusion power throughout the economy. So, I kind of went through that a little bit quick. I know I threw a lot in there, but hopefully that is some useful material. Oh, and just in the context of the previous graph, this is, if we went full nuclear in our program, we could basically double total electricity generation for the economy with the same physical material cost of the electricity, physical material inputs, right? So this is the inversion of what we saw before, right? The Biden program, they want to triple the physical inputs, the material inputs, to provide the same electricity, right? Going backwards, it's really a collapse process. Moving forward, going to higher energy flux density sources like nuclear means you can double the electricity generation with the same physical material inputs, right? So these are some of the physical factors behind what you see as cost, what you experience as the cost of electricity, and so on. So, hopefully that's useful. Provide some material, some stuff we can utilize in combating this crazy policy and getting these things reversed both in the state and nationally, and actually getting a real growth program going again, which obviously we're going to require a major investment in energy.